Well, hello, I'm Josh, and I'm back once again with another movie to show you. Now, this week I'm going to be talking about One Eyed Jacks, the only film directed by Marlon Brando. Now, if you're not familiar with Marlon Brando, he's known as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, actors of all time. Now, he was known for being quite unpredictable in his acting, and this seems to have carried over to his directing as well. The story focuses around the relationship between Rio and his mentor, Dad Longworth. After robbing a bank down in Mexico, the two are chased by the police onto a high ridge and they find themselves with one horse between them. Rio lets Dad go on ahead and find another horse for him. But after finding one, Dad becomes succumbed by greed and rides off, leaving Rio behind for capture. The film then cuts to Rio's escape from prison 5 years later. He discovers Longworth has reinvented himself as the sheriff of a small coastal town with a wife and stepdaughter. Upon discovering this, Rio vows to get revenge on his former mentor. And one thing that's almost as interesting as the film itself is the long production history of One Eyed Jacks. Around the time the film was made, many actors were getting into producing movies themselves and forming their own production companies. Several actors, such as Kirk Douglas and Burt Lancaster, were actually making some really incredible films through their own companies. So Marlon Brando, fresh off his newly acquired fame with films like On the Waterfront and Streetcar Named Desire, formed his own company called Pennebaker Studios. They spent a while looking for source material for their first movie to make, and they eventually settled on the book called The Authentic Death of Henry Jones, which was based on the story of Billy the Kid. Originally, Brando wasn't planned to direct the film. Instead, a young Stanley Kubrick, fresh off the success he had with The Killing and Passive Glory, was slated to direct the film. Before that, another great director, Sam Peckinpah, who's most famously known for films such as Straw Dogs and The Wild Bunch, was set to write the film. Other early drafts were actually written by Twilight Zone creator Rod Serling. However, Guy Trosper and Calder Willingham were eventually settled on, as they are the only credited writers. After several disputes with Brando, most notably over the casting of Dad Longworth, Kubrick eventually left the project a few weeks before filming began to finish Spartacus for Kirk Douglas. After Kubrick's firing, Brando stepped in as director, and he was all set to begin, only he realized that his knowledge of the other side of the camera was extremely limited. He later joked about having a tough time framing shots with the viewfinder until someone pointed out that he was actually looking to the wrong end. So production was held back quite a bit while Brando figured out all the technical aspects that he needed to know. And since there was no video playback in those days, Brando would make use of a stand-in so that he could work out blocking and then step in once the filming began. Brando also encouraged the actors to improvise their lines and would get lots of coverage at these scenes, working out dialogue as they went. The filming of One Eye Jacks was incredibly stressful for Marlon Brando, and this was reportedly around the time he first started gaining a lot of weight. The costume department kept having to resize his clothes, and this happened so often that on his birthday his cake was accompanied with a sign which read, "Don't feed the director." With One Eye Jacks going so incredibly over budget and over schedule, Brando was really doubting his abilities as a director, and as we know, he never did it again. I think this is a shame as Brando really made a great and original film here, and there are several moments in One Eye Jacks that showed Brando had a lot of promise as a director. For instance, I love the first shot of Rio sitting on a counter eating a banana. It's an unexpected reveal for the main star, and it automatically establishes him as a kind of innocent and playful character. This is solidified when he weighs the peels on a large scale beside him. However, our expectations are completely subverted when he tosses the other peel on the scale and pulls out a pistol. The camera then dollies back to reveal he is part of a bank robbery. This cues the audience in to expect the unexpected and that Rio is not your usual Western outlaw character. But it goes even deeper than that. This shot really conveys the main theme of the movie. The film is called One Eye Jacks because the idea was that the audience would not be shown a character's full personality. You would only be able to see one side of them, just like you only see one side or one eye of a jack on a playing card.
You're a one-eyed jack around here, Dad. I seen the other side of your face.
So when the shot begins on Rio eating a banana, that represents the part of his personality he shows. When we pull out and the bank robbery is revealed, we are clued in on the fact that there was more to the scene that we were not initially shown. It is often said that you can tell by a film's first couple of shots whether or not the director knows what they're doing, and I feel that One Eye Jacks is no exception. The fact that Brando was able to insert these themes into such a memorable shot is pretty incredible for any first time director. Another great scene is when Rio finally confronts Dad Longworth. Dad is found lying down on a hammock in this beautifully composed shot where Rio is seen riding in on horseback, far out in the distance. Once Dad sees that it's Rio, the angle shifts to a low, heroic, and intimidating shot of him as he rides into frame. Next, we cut to an extreme close up of Longworth's face. We feel his panic as he is realizing what this means. The music comes in to further sell the emotion, but we really get it all through the framing and expression on Malden's face. This tension is perfectly crafted and executed by Brando, and I think this scene in particular really stands out as showing Brando's skill as a director. Being the actor he was, most people would probably expect the film to have great performances in it. But Brando proves with this scene that he could also use his camera in interesting ways to tell his story. Now, as you can probably see, One Eye Jacks has some absolutely stunning cinematography. The setting on a coastal town allows for some really unique imagery that I haven't seen in a Western before or since. The film was the last of Paramount's releases to be shot in VistaVision, a widescreen process created by Paramount which allowed for an extremely high definition image. It was shot by Hollywood legend Charles Lang, who had been making films since the 20s. This old Hollywood look, combined with the new Hollywood approach Brando was bringing in, add yet another layer to why this is such a unique film. Movies were already changing in the late 50s, and by the time One Eye Jacks came out in 1961, they were coming up to a big change in the way movies were made. A whole new kind of filmmaking burst onto the scene in the 60s. Young filmmakers were coming in with newer equipment and subverting many of the filmmaking rules and traditions of classic Hollywood. And this means One Eye Jacks ended up sitting kind of on the cusp of these two major eras in film. And now for the actors. Marlon Brando is great as Rio. As with the theme, you are never completely clued in on who he is or what he is thinking, something quite unusual for the main character. Rio is also not always the good guy. This was apparently going to be a bigger element of the film, with Rio and Dad swapping between who was good and who was bad at particular moments. But Paramount mandated some reshoots of key scenes, which made Dad Longworth the clear villain. These altered scenes can actually be found pretty easily as they are pretty much the only processed shots in the whole film. On the subject of Dad Longworth, Karl Malden gives a fantastic performance. He had worked with Brando several times at this point, on stage as well as in two of his biggest films. Kubrick did not think that Malden fit the part, suggesting Spencer Tracy instead, but Brando stuck with Malden and I think he made the right choice. Katie Girardo is also great as Maria Longworth. She appeared in lots of classic films back in the day, most memorably in High Noon, and just like in that film, she takes what could have easily been a background, one-dimensional character and makes her feel like a real person. Pina Pellicer also does a wonderful job as Rio's love interest, Louisa. This was her first and I believe only American film, as she tragically died only a few years later in 1964. Brando apparently had difficulties getting the right reactions from her, as she was understandably quite nervous doing her first Hollywood film with one of Hollywood's greatest actors. Despite the problems, she gives a very nuanced performance that was quite rare for the time. Slim Pickens is also in the film as the deputy Lon Dedrick. He gives a really creepy and uncomfortable performance which I wasn't expecting to see, knowing him more for his comedic roles in Doctor Strangelove and Blazing Saddles.
Taggart! Yes, sir?
He actually worked as a real cowboy when he was younger, and had been appearing in films since the mid-40s, but never really became famous until Doctor Strangelove. From then on, he would basically play that same character in every movie he was in. Now, in most cases, typecasting to this degree would be seen as a bit of a problem. Yet since Slim Pickens was so good at the character, somehow it didn't really matter. He got work anyway. His performance in One Eye Jacks, however, is much different from how he would later be known, and ultimately more frightening.
Scare you?
The way he looms around watching Louisa and planting seeds of doubt and hate in Dad Longworth's ear makes him a great villain. When watching, I'm always surprised how quickly I forget that it's Slim Pickens on the screen, that goofy cowboy who's most famous for riding the nuclear bomb like a rodeo bull. Along with these main roles, the film is filled with tons of great supporting actors that really fill up the movie. People like Elisha Cook Jr. and Timothy Carey, who are welcome additions to the cast. Ben Johnson is also quite memorable in the film as the shady Bob Emery. Another interesting choice is Larry Duran, who plays Rio's friend Chico. Duran was actually Brando's stand-in and had never really acted before in a film. Despite his inexperience, Duran gives a great performance and feels like the right choice. Though One Eye Jacks was not an initial success in the box office, it has gone on to grow quite a following. And once I saw One Eye Jacks, I actually noticed a lot of references to it popping up in different areas of pop culture.
You ever heard of One Eye Jacks?
Isn't that that Western with Marlon Brando?
Get up, you scum-sucking pig.
You scum-sucking pig! You son of a motherless goat! Who are you?
So if you'd like to watch this film, you are in luck, because it's in the public domain. That means you can watch it for free on YouTube without any problems. Word of caution though, since it is in the public domain, not all versions of the film will look great. In fact, this film was kind of notorious for having some very poor looking copies of it being sold on DVDs and VHS tapes. Thankfully, a few years ago, Martin Scorsese and Steven Spielberg actually headed a huge restoration project on the film. They got it back in its original aspect ratio and remastered it in a new 4K scan. And this new restored version can be found physically from the Criterion Collection, as I have here. It's also available from Arrow Video in the UK. But besides that, like, comment, and subscribe, and be sure to tune in next week to see what I'll be talking about then. Alright, I'll see you next week.